There we go. This meeting's being live streamed. Hi, I'm Renee Hobbs and welcome to Across the Generations. We're going to get started right away. This session deals with media literacy
There we
for
go.
mid-career
This meeting's being
folks.
live streamed.
Beautiful. Let me share my screen with you. We'll get started. Thank you for being part of the Media Education Lab community. You can see we have a bunch of events coming up. February 20th, our ticketed event called Lessons from the Media Education Lab. February 28th, Media Literacy for Seniors. March 7th, Student Created Media with Scott Spicer from the University of Minnesota. And then March 14th, Intergenerational Dialogue. But today we're talking across the generations. And this slide deck is available for you on the Media Education Lab website right here, February 14th. Here's what I hope to do in the next 55 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about what are the developmental issues of life at mid-career. And then we're going to do a case study of police officers in Austin, Texas, who I was very privileged to be able to work with in the spring of 2022. That case study flushed out for me some issues about areas of growth and challenges that mid-career folks experience as media literacy learners. And since we're always becoming media literate, we never arrive, we're always becoming media literate. That means all of us are media literacy learners, becoming media literacy through our lived experience and our dialogue and discussion and our efforts to learn. So I've posed 3 discussion questions at the end of my presentation that I think will be useful as you think about yourself, whether you're at mid-career or in a different stage of life, but hopefully the discussion will be thought-provoking, personal, and lively. All right, let's get started. Over the course of this year-long seminar, we're definitely understanding how our media literacy learning experiences intersect with certain developmental features of lived experience. And so in my training, I was exposed to the work of Erik Erikson. Give me a thumbs up if you ever encountered the work of Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson was a developmental psychologist. He came up with this set of stages, I guess they called them, stages of psychosocial development. And he said that humans had to work through these tensions, these paradoxes, these contradictions, these challenges in infancy about trust and mistrust. In preschool, autonomy, being able to control your body, right? Versus shame, not being able to control your body. Initiative versus guilt in the school age years. Industry versus inferiority in the early teenage years. Identity versus role confusion, also teenage years, and continuing into the 20s and maybe even the 30s. And he identified that in mid-career, right, that we, people 35 and up, that counts as mid-career these days, we face these challenges: intimacy versus isolation, which is the challenge in finding love and giving love; generativity and stagnation, which is providing care and accepting care; and ego integrity versus despair, which is finding wisdom and sharing wisdom. So the challenges, the developmental challenges that Erikson saw adult learners in were ones that were focused on love, care, and wisdom. And I think that's a very useful lens to think about the tensions and paradoxes of this stage of life, right? And I love how Erikson identifies some of the risks. I think he's very bold in stating what the risks of this developmental stage are. The risk of isolation, the risk of stagnation, the risk of despair. And I don't know about you, but I'm wrestling with all three of those. In a post-pandemic world, aren't we all? Right? So I want to use these three concepts, the stages associated with love, care, and wisdom, to share with you a story about my experience with my colleague Pam Stager in teaching police trainers media literacy in a 6-hour instructional program for them as educators. You can learn more about this at the Media Education Lab. Go to Media Education Law Enforcement Officers and find out. As you can see from this picture, one of the first things we did with the police officers was we helped them critically analyze media. And here they are working around the classroom. And in this case, these gentlemen are unpacking the critical question: what lifestyles, values, and points of view are represented? We watched media, and then we talked about it, and then we shared our perspectives. And why was I in Austin, Texas? Well, you probably know why. Let's take a look. APG, GPS.
I think that Garrett Foster, the one who was murdered out here a week ago tonight, was a brave soldier who was fighting for people's rights, fighting for Americans' rights.
Armed Black Lives Matter protester Garrett Foster was shot and killed in downtown Austin by Daniel Perry, a Fort Hood sergeant claiming self-defense last Saturday.
If somebody is being honest with themselves and they saw somebody raising an AK-47 in their direction and they had the ability to defend themselves, there's not one person being honest with themselves who wouldn't have done the same exact thing that Sergeant Perry did. Exactly
1 week after the shooting, Perry remains free, and Foster's supporters vocal.
We were out here peacefully demonstrating. There was a group of us all gathered around the vigil.
You will all go to jail if you keep blocking the crosswalk and sidewalk. You understand? On the police department.
So there was a brief warning from a car that drove by at one point.
Police say that warning was given approximately 3 times.
Then they all just kind of rolled around on their bikes. Started pushing, like forcing, hitting, like pepper spraying people.
Okay, so you understand that protests in Austin, Texas, after the local violent incidents in relation to the Black Lives Matter movement, created a lot of concern about how police officers in Austin, Texas were being trained. Just last year, the city settled in a $10 million lawsuit because 2 people were seriously injured by police during those protests. The police were there to ensure the safety of protesters. Remember, in Texas, it's open carry. Protesters can walk around with AK-47s, right? So the police were trying to contain the protest, but there were some terrible injuries that resulted to folks, and the city of Austin recognized that police training maybe needed an overhaul. There's a great 60 Minutes episode about the city of Austin and its effort to reimagine policing. And our opportunity to go in and do media literacy with police trainers was part of that initiative. Now, right away, I have to say that in order for me to work with Austin police officers, and these are the instructors who teach the next generation of police officers, I had to set aside my own us versus them paradigms. Yeah, I did, because I have beliefs and attitudes about police officers, and how could I teach them if I didn't set aside my us versus them paradigm? So that was the challenge for us as we designed this curriculum. You can see a screenshot. We demonstrated 12 learning activities over the course of a 6-hour training. Some of them were very brief and some of them were quite extended. And today I want to talk about 3 of the activities that we did and what insights emerge. Now, the average age of our participants, we had 36 police officers, and the average age was about, they ranged from 30 to 50. So they were mid-career folks, right? And we had these goals for the program. We wanted the teachers, these are teachers of police officers, but they have a gun and a badge. They're police officers first and instructors second. We wanted them to understand the rising influence of video in American society, understand how media messages about law enforcement shape perceptions of both police and citizens. We wanted to have them recognize how the videos that are used in police training can be used to normalize or disrupt patterns of bias, stereotypes, and inappropriate use of force. We wanted them to understand how video content and form can be used to reinforce or challenge power relationships. We wanted them to think about their own decisions about how they use video as a tool for learning, because video is a major learning tool for police education. We wanted them to gain knowledge about why and how video increases learning, strategies to guide their responsible selection and use of video for learning purposes. We wanted them to apply instructional practices to the use of videos that accelerate adult learning and advance their own critical thinking skills as a consumer and creator, and discover opportunities to integrate critical thinking about media literacy into the courses they teach. So we had an ambitious agenda for this day. One activity we did, as I showed you in that first slide, was a 5 corners activity where participants worked in small groups around in a jigsaw kind of pattern. We watched a 6-minute excerpt from a documentary about the murder of 5 officers in Dallas, Texas by Micah Xavier Johnson. This guy was a veteran. He was upset over the police shootings of Black men. And of course, there were a lot of those in 2015 and 2016. So many. And basically, he ambushed police and shot at them, killed 5 of them before he was killed by police. This short video clip that we used showed the SWAT officer responsible for trying to get Micah Xavier Johnson to stop shooting, how he talked about the need to empathize with Johnson as part of the negotiation process. We walked through the critical questions. You know them by now, right? Who's the author and what's the purpose? What lifestyles, values, and points of view? How might different people interpret this message differently? What's omitted? And what we discovered was that police officers had a really hard time hearing the point of view of the SWAT negotiator. Not anyone in this group could articulate the SWAT negotiator's argument that he needed to be able to identify with Micah Xavier Johnson, who said that he thought he was a patriot, that the terrorists in our country were police officers, and by killing them, he was protecting people. None of them could hear that message because we found that our identities shape the way we comprehend and interpret media messages. These police officers struggled to see Micah Xavier Johnson as a human being, because in their eyes, he was a killer and he murdered their members of their own tribe, right? The tribal community of police officers. A second activity that we did was called Connecting Feelings and Ideas, where we showed short video clips that showed police officers making media about their lived experience as police officers, right? In one case, this image here shows a guy also in Dallas, Texas, who was reprimanded for his hair. His hair was not regulation, I suppose. And so he was reprimanded, and it was controversial, and it was a controversial story that had a good resolution. There we wanted to use the emotional intelligence wheel. You can see the icon of that there. We wanted to help police officers recognize that a wide range of emotions can be useful for learning purposes. And one of the reasons why we use video in the classroom is to activate strong emotions. But we also recognized that instructors need to consider how and what kinds of emotions are activated when we use video in the classroom. We showed another, oops, here, let's see if I can click this forward. Can I click this forward? We showed another video that featured a police officer who was having feelings of distress when she went through the drive-through at McDonald's, and she was hungry, and the way she was treated by the people in the drive-through window was quite distressing to her. She was hungry and she was tired. It was the end of her shift, and she was just exhausted and angry and hurt. And so we wanted to illustrate this idea that when you're using video in the classroom, you can't control how students are going to respond to the video, but you can provide time for learners to share their own emotional responses, right? And that you need to provide that time. And sometimes instructors can misjudge the emotional impact of a video due to their own desensitization. This is a well-acknowledged problem in the field of policing and police education, where instructors routinely use examples of people being shot with brand new recruits, right? And so the police instructor doesn't feel much emotion at all when showing that video. They use it every year. They show it every time. Every time they see it, they feel less about it. But for the beginning recruits who experience that video where someone gets shot and killed in front of them, it's important to provide time for people to process their feelings. And what we learned watching the police officers struggle with this was this: mistrust and cynicism affect how people interpret the actions of others. What we saw was police officers say, oh, that black guy in Dallas who was upset about the hair regulations, he was just a whiner. This officer here, this female officer at the McDonald's, she's just trying to build her Instagram channel. The raw cynicism kind of interfered with critical thinking about media, actually. And that's something we had to consider as part of one of the consequences of our instruction. And then finally, I want to share with you a third activity that we use called Walk the Line. Many of you are familiar with this activity. It's a classic. It's sometimes called a standing discussion. And you can see us all there. Pam Stager, my colleague, is leading this part of the workshop, and there she is. People sit at their desks and are asked to rate their level of agreement on these 10 sentences on a piece of paper. And then she reads the statement aloud, and people are invited to go stand on a line with strongly disagree at one end and strongly agree at the other end. So for example, she says, now let's stand up, agree or disagree. Anyone who works hard enough can make it in this country. And you can see that the officers are lined up all along the continuum. And this is only a shot. They're all stretched out across the entire room. And then we're invited to listen to each other with this prompt. Why are you standing where you're standing? And one officer says, my parents are immigrants and I feel like my parents worked hard and that they worked so hard that I was able to be here in this country. And another person at the other end of the room is asked, why are you standing where you're standing? And that person says, it's not about hard work. It's actually much more complicated than that because a lot of people in my family work really hard and they don't get anything. And that there are baked in inequalities in our society. And this statement I disagree with. So we listen across the line and we're invited to just listen. And you can see some of these topics are were quite controversial. Like this one, police know more about the community than the community knows about the police. Police who agreed with that said, look, we get called in when families are at in their most crisis moments. We get to see all the bad shit that can happen in a family. And so we know about stuff that nobody else knows about really. And other people said, and other people disagreed with that and had ideas about the idea that what police know about the community isn't the whole story, that the police end up learning about all the darkness that happens in a community, but the police don't get much exposure to all the good things that happen in a community. And so the discussion was incredibly rich. And you can see there are even some media literacy items in Walk the Line, like live cop shows portray the reality of everyday policing. Most rap music is anti-police. And other questions that invited rich discussion. What did we learn from this lesson? We learned that when people are in a standing discussion, they gain knowledge and they increase their respect for differing points of view because they are invited to listen with appreciation, without judgment, and without being under the obligation to accept or reject or persuade someone to accept their own views. So this was an example of a very productive discussion, and it was productive precisely because the officers discovered that they learn more from diverging ideas than they did from converging ideas. For example, question 7. Ha! We thought this would be quite controversial. Police officers who sport visible tattoos are unprofessional. They all clustered around the strongly disagree. There was no divergence there. They all agreed. Everybody has tattoos, right? And tattoos don't have any bearing on professionalism. So there wasn't much good discussion because we didn't have much disagreement. So this was a big aha for these instructors. Remember, these police officers are coming from a command and control structure, right? Where, like in the military, there's a commanding officer, and then there's a next generation, there's a next layer of leadership, and so on, down to the rank and file. For officers, it was a big aha that there is a great benefit to having a room full of people with divergent points of view, divergent way of thinking. They kept over and over emphasizing what a big aha that was. And that made us think that they might not get that much exposure to that style of learning in their ordinary training. All right, we did a lot of other cool things in the program, but I want to bring it back to these 3 themes that are the focus of our exploration of media literacy in mid-career. these three examples invited me to think about the challenge of love, especially the challenge of loving people that I have so many stereotypes about. For me, it was a phenomenal experience to be with police officers and learn from them, learn with them, and learn about their work. And my love for them increased. But it was a challenge because of the stereotypes that I hold about people in that occupation. This topic of generativity versus stagnation, the challenge of care, also invites us to think about how at mid-career we can get into, dare I say, ruts. Our occupations and our life experiences create norms that can be stagnating. And I started thinking about how I live in a bubble. I never am exposed to police officers. I never get exposed to issues of criminal justice and law enforcement. And I started becoming aware of how much I was missing out on by not being in dialogue with people from this community. And so for me, the experience of working with police officers was very generative. I ended up teaching a grad course on media, crime, and law enforcement. And now I'm involved in Courageous RI, and that's bringing together people, including law enforcement people, for media literacy conversations. So I hadn't been fully aware of my own stagnation that was caused by not being in diverse communities where I was exposed to people whose worldview was really different from me. Now, the last category, it's all about wisdom, and I have nothing to say about wisdom. Wisdom is a mystery to me, and I hope someday to have it. That being said, here are the discussion questions I would like to open up for our small group discussion. How does your occupation and life experience affect the kinds of media that connect or isolate you? How does your occupation and life experience affect how you encounter new experiences? And how does your occupation and life experience affect how you listen to others whose views are different from your own? So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to, hold on here, click, 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 click. What do I do here? I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm going to put those questions into the chat. I'm going to put those questions into the chat, and then I'm going to see if somebody in the room can explain, what are you guys going to be doing in your small group breakout room?
Talking about the questions they gave us.
Correct. And what other best practices are there for being in a small group discussion like this at the Media Education Lab? What advice do you want to offer about how to have a productive discussion, things you should keep in mind or do? Barbara. Turn your microphone on.
You want to make sure you're listening to other people and give people who are quieter than myself a chance to speak. Wait a minute before if you've gone, wait a minute before you voice another opinion.
Nice. What other recommendations do you have about how to have a productive discussion around these very personal questions? One more piece of wisdom from the sages here. Stay curious, says Heather Lynn in the chat. You rock, my friend. I think it's good to make sure you situate yourself in your lived experience, introduce yourself, right? So thumbs up if you are ready for the breakout rooms to be established. I'm only going to put 5 or 6 people in a breakout room I think you're going to have a great conversation. We've got about 15 minutes to do this. And when we come back, we'll do some reflection. But here's the thing. If you're having fun, you're probably also learning. So there you go. Rooms are open. Have a great conversation and make a new friend.
Renee, I missed the beginning because the doctor's appointment I was in went too long. Will there be a recording and slides?
Absolutely. The
So I can catch up?
recording, yep, the recording is at the YouTube channel, and I'll also put it in the link.
Put everything in. Great.
Yep, I'll put it in the
Okay.
link as well.
Couldn't hurry any faster.
No worries, no worries. We're glad you're here. Okay, people are going into their breakout rooms. And I want to make sure there's at least, I'm going to move Sky to room 4. So there's at least 3 people in 5, and I'm going to move Randall to 4. Okay. And Joyce, if you need help moving to a breakout room, you just let me know. I'm going to join. Looks like I have 4 in room 4, 4 in room 3. I'm going to join room 2.
Hi, this is Joyce, and I'm having difficulty maneuvering the things.
Hi, Joyce. I will move you to a breakout room and then hopefully you can join, but if not, I'll try again, if that's okay with you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, of course. Just 1 second. Joyce, by any chance, do you see a pop-up? Oh, I think you do. Hi, Craig. Thank you for joining. We are currently in our breakout room, so I'll just assign you to one of them, and then you can participate in the discussion and meet some people there. Hello. Sí. Ah, pues. Ah, está bien. ¿Ya qué hora? Mm.